Seth is the best support ZenlessZoneZero has ever seen, is what some people like to say and believe. And you know what? I think they're almost right. But today we're going to clear up misconceptions about Seth, including that statement and more. Without further ado, let's get into it. In my original impressions and then guide of Seth, I had a few impressions and takes on how to play Seth, and for the most part, I think that they still stand true. One of Seth's playstyles include him being more of an attack and crit damage carry, and primarily being a damage dealer, and the other involves him building Anomaly to kind of supplement the amount of damage that he's doing when paired alongside Anomaly characters. But what I didn't realize until playing him way more on live servers and hearing from others is that this goes a little bit deeper. There are actually two different variations that also change the way that you play Seth, and it involves the way that you actually physically use his skills. Both of these will be familiar to you, but you might just not have noticed it. The first is a playstyle where you actually use most of Seth's kit. You use his charged basic attack, you use his EX special attack, and you use his chain attack when possible to activate things like swing jazz, or in order to give off the anomaly proficiency buff to one of your allies. But the other is something that I've seen a lot more players gravitate towards, especially if they're playing Seth alongside characters like Lucy and Jane. This is the no field time Seth build, and it primarily revolves around using defensive assists, the occasional EX special, and in super rare occasions, a charged basic attack because sometimes you want to get his additional ability off. However, this is where one of the biggest misunderstandings about Seth arrives, mostly because there is no one way to play Seth, and there is no one-size-fit-all playstyle. There are certain scenarios where players will use all of his charged basics, will use his EX special, and don't really mind the fact that he's on field, even sometimes using his ultimate depending on the scenario, and that's primarily where I've seen a lot of discourse in my comment section and around the community in terms of how to actually play him. There are certain players, of course, that only use his defensive assist, and that's totally fine if you're just trying to use his defensive assist to get the anomaly proficiency buff, but if you're not using his charge attack or his chain attack at all, well, goodbye to the anomaly build-up resistance that you'd otherwise gain. But then that's where the additional misunderstanding comes from, and of course, one of the things I love talking about on this channel is context and nuance, because guess what? The value of this anomaly build-up resistance is kind of subjective. There are certain characters that actually need this, and the reason why this is an even bigger misunderstanding, because there are players on both sides that will die on the hill that you must have this build-up resistance, you have to use it no matter what, and then there are also players that will say, who cares? And now where you should probably land as a player is somewhere in the middle, where you have to understand that certain fights or characters do actually need more of the anomaly build-up resistance, and some of the other characters don't need it at all. To give a more specific example, let's talk about Jane Doe. Jane Doe, if you haven't already tried her already, is one of the fastest anomaly appliers in the game, and that's primarily because of how much build-up rate she gains through all parts of her kit. In general, Jane has the ability to apply assaults super quickly, and a lot of times they overkill or do an insane amount of damage. It is extremely common to see a character like Jane Doe pulling up with something like 250, even 300,000 damage at times, which does kind of affect whether or not you even need Seth's additional ability. If you've looked up any guides or heard any discussion about whether Jane Doe needs anomaly mastery or attack percent on her 6 slot, you've probably also heard the take that Jane Doe might not even need anomaly mastery because, well, if you could just make the one burst or the assault anomaly proc explode and one-shot your enemy, well then you don't need the anomaly mastery at all. And wouldn't you know it, that's actually the same case for Seth, where unfortunately you kind of have to test and see how much damage you do with a character like Seth. Otherwise, sometimes you might not even need the additional ability, whereas other times, especially if you're fighting against a character like Nineveh, you need as much damage as you can get. So the first misunderstanding when it comes to Seth is honestly being super stuck in their ways, or being super you have to use every part of his kit, or super don't be on field with Seth at all, otherwise you're going to lose the fight or not clear in time. That's just not true. Now for my second misunderstanding, it actually involves people that have talked about his EX special and his attacks in general. Now Seth of course has many great skills, including things like his EX special, which allow him to transfer his anomaly proficiency buff, but something that is true for both his EX special attack and his chain attack that you aren't able to see until you actually perform it yourself is how long it takes to cast these abilities. Now for players that do swear by only using their defensive assists, they're not really wrong. These are some of the longest animations compared to just doing a follow-up assist and then giving out your buff, although some combos involving using your EX special so you don't run out of energy is good and makes sense in terms of actual resource management. The flip side of that is that especially if you're pairing Seth alongside Jane Doe, just expending your energy for no reason when you have plenty of time on your anomaly proficiency buff kind of makes no sense on Seth. If someone like Jane Doe was able to apply one more assault anomaly in the time that you're trying to get off a chain attack, or if you're spending a lot of time using charge attacks with your Seth where your Jane could have probably already killed the enemy anyways, from a pure min-max point of view, there's really no reason for you to be using his EX special or even his long chain attack. Disclaimer before you clip this out of context and say, oh my gosh, Connor said that none of these abilities are good. That's not what I'm saying. And as with everything in the game, you need context, but it is very true that if you want to cut down on time, long animations, or if you're really close to clearing a Shiyu defense but need a couple extra seconds to clear, one of the best things I've found in order to get better clears in Shiyu defense is to actually take a look at what skills are taking too much time and find out what exactly you can get rid of in terms of your overall rotation, and use this to cut away at time so that you can get closer and closer to an S clear. Now, if you want even more proof, you might think that one of the fastest teams in the game involves something like Jun, or it might involve someone like Ellen, and you would be kind of right because it does involve Ellen, but something that most players assume is that, well, with Ellen has her best in slot team, which is Ellen, Lycone, and Sokaku. They are so perfect for each other. They have all the ice damage synergy, they have the attack increase from Sokaku. Well, actually, once you start to make optimizations up at the top, and as some speedrunners have shown, having someone like Rina who can instantly put out her buff, and you not needing to go through Sokaku's chain attack or the charged EX special attack does actually mean that you can kill faster. My second disclaimer for this is that of course you don't have to speedrun the game, and if you're just looking for an S clear, well, these are just some strategies that you may be able to use to get a faster time if you're really close. But at the top end, if you're not speedrunning, it doesn't really mean that much. Now, interestingly, the next section we have to talk about when it comes to Seth is actually stats. If you were someone that has taken a look at a Seth guide already, I'm sure you guys have seen recommendations for things like swing jazz, specifically because the energy regen is really good, but there is something you need to know about energy. As you can see right here, energy regen means that it influences the amount of energy agents recover per second in combat. This is of course very impactful for characters that are reliant on their EX special attack. So what does this matter with Seth? Well, if you are pairing Seth with someone that is okay with you being on field as Seth, including characters like Grace or any anomaly character that doesn't really mind the fact that he gets out his anomaly proficiency through charge attacks, you're gonna need his charge attack, and the only way to get that is by expending energy with his EX special. Now, the reason why the conversation of energy regen is so important is because, truth be told, if the only source of energy regen that you have is 20% increase to your energy regen, it actually doesn't add up to much. That isn't to say that once you start stacking energy regen together that you can't see a sizable difference, but based on calculations done, you can actually gain your EX special 8 seconds faster using a character like Seth, depending on how much energy regen you have in your kit, but that's only after you've reached a certain threshold of energy, primarily through having the swing jazz and a 6-slot energy regen disc at the same time. Now, you may be wondering at this point if this applies for other stats that aren't achievable as substats, i.e. a stat like impact, and the answer is yes, impact actually works very similarly. If all you have is 2-piece Shockstar Disco and you don't have any other massive source of impact in your kit, the amount that the 6% will actually provide to you is extremely low. And that brings me to my overall point when it comes to stats, specifically on Seth, especially when you're talking about 2-piece sets. The 2-piece set doesn't matter nearly as much since the amount that it actually affects you is pretty small, especially if you don't commit to a specific stat that you're getting. And with all that, I actually have something worth mentioning about Seth that I've actually made a mistake myself, and I've talked to several theory crafters about. Depending on how you play Seth, if you decide to use him as the assist only king, having energy regen on his 6th disc is actually pointless. Using something like anomaly mastery, attack percent, or even having impact can be good depending on what you pair alongside him. But Connor, you might be asking, well, Seth does have his 4th Mindscape, but if you don't have his 4th Mindscape, I mean, it's 6% impact and a disk drive. Is that even worth it? Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is where I'm about to break your mind, because this is a little bit experimental. However, I have been hearing people try this super interesting tech when it comes to impact. Let me explain to you the concept of, well, who cares about classes? To begin this section, let me first preface, Peacekeeper and Spring Embrace are both fantastic options for Seth if you haven't already picked them up. They have attack percent, and if you are running more of an anomaly build specifically on Seth, the attack percent helps, and the energy regen that you get from the passives are fantastic. However, if you're using Seth as someone that only comes on field to do a little bit of daze or perform defensive assists, one of the most popular builds that I've found is actually a full impact build. Connor, you might be asking again, read Shockstar Disco's 4-piece passive. getting the 20% increased days is only after you do basic attacks, dash attacks, or dodge counters, and how are you going to be doing any of these when you're ultimately going to be off field most of the time? Well, fortunately, the answer is you won't have to do them. The main reason why this tech I'm about to describe is so interesting is because although having things like Peacekeeper and Spring Embrace are great for anomaly specific builds, if you aren't someone that wants to play Seth specifically as an anomaly based character, you can actually build him as a Dazer with this interesting kind of quirky build. If you've played any other Hoyo games, you might be familiar with the fact that there is a little bit of red text that says whenever a character lacks the specific specialty or class, they're unable to trigger a passive effect or the rest of effect on a W engine or a light cone. If you are someone that is playing Seth, the rest of his kit is a bit ambiguous and gray in terms of how he's supposed to be optimally played, because truth be told, he kind of does his job just by giving the buff to his team. So therefore, there are actually players that are running him on Precious Fossilized Core, and this is as goofy as it sounds. It is just going to give you the impact in order to allow you to stun a little bit more on Seth. Now, there is a little bit of optimization to this, so bear with me, but here's what we found when it comes to this setup. His actual set doesn't matter too much. However, if you are trying to use something like Swing Jazz and make the most of its kit, you will have to do chain attacks with this build, although that's not really that relevant. You can always apply chain attacks sometimes. But in terms of the actual build itself, the build will be him on 2-piece Shockstar Disco with an Impact 6-slot disk drive, and already you're seeing a 24% impact increase. Now, Seth's impact is nothing incredible here, it's only 94, but if for some reason you decided to equip perhaps a Stunner W engine, you have 131 impact, which is not amazing, I get it. However, you are going to see a difference in how much impact you're applying, and this isn't even considering the amount of additional days that you gain when you have his M4. Now, this build, of course, is definitely more niche compared to just running him as an anomaly character or just running him as a damage dealer, but keep in mind that there are, of course, ways to optimize this. Although Fossil is what I recommended earlier, if you end up using something like Hellfire Gears, you actually gain more attack, which of course is really nice because his shield scales off of attack, and so therefore, if you really want to make the most out of Impact Seth, what you actually need to do is get an S-rank W engine, and that will basically include all of the S-rank W engines currently within the Stunner category. Lycone's W engine, Kaleda's W engine, and even Ching-Yi's W engine will work depending on whatever you have access to, but as always, if you don't have access to it, you do still get 15% impact from Precious Fossilized Core, which is nice, but ultimately it would be nice to get the increase, which is 18% when you get an S-rank, and the additional attack that comes with it. And now there's one final misconception that I myself also missed, so shame on me, my bad, but you guys rightfully pointed out, and I've also seen a lot of people talk about when it comes to Seth, and that's his skill priority. Again, if you are someone that is pairing Seth with non-Jane Doe teams, it is definitely fine for you to commit to something like special attacks, your chain attacks, or upgrading his basic attack, all things considered. However, originally I wasn't sure how much I was going to be using his assist, because in most cases, all you're going to be doing is just using your charge attack or your EX special or your chain attack, and then you move on. How wrong I was then to realize that 99% of players were just using his assist, and it makes sense, especially for a Jane team. So therefore, if you are on the fence about what you should be upgrading when it comes to Seth, of course, damage dealer Seth will have different priorities, but if you're playing Seth as a support, consider either upgrading everything in a line and making things equal, or definitely put a bit of priority on assist. Don't have it on the ignore list or put it at the bottom of your priorities. I promise you it will definitely come in handy. If you want even further validation that this is actually quite worth it, take a look at the value that you gain per level and consider the fact that you'll probably be casting this anywhere between 6 to 12 times a fight. It starts to add up. And now I know I said this was the end of it, but as always, I have a surprise for you guys, and that's the fact that Seth actually doesn't have most of his best in slot available. He does have some of his best pairings in terms of teammates. I do think that Seth and Jane are perfect for each other. However, what you'll notice is that in terms of sets, in terms of skills, in terms of playstyle, and sometimes even in terms of W engine, what you actually want from a character like Seth is not always what you'll get. For anomaly application, his current W engine is totally fine, and having things like Freedom Blues or even Swing Jazz does make sense if you are pairing him and are just going to use his chain attack in a normal rotation. As it stands right now, there isn't a truly good set for him currently that actually accentuates his ability to be off field a lot, or even really rewards the fact that all he wants to do is do charge attacks or be off field, one or the other. So therefore, the final thing that I want to clear up is that although there are definitely established ways to play Seth right now, and we'll just have to wait and see, because this definitely doesn't feel like the actual way to play him, especially since his charge attack and EX special attack don't do amazing damage, and also take a long time to perform. Anyways though guys, this was basically just an update to the guide and impressions that I had when it comes to Seth. I've been playing him pretty much every single day, testing him even more and more, playing on people's accounts, guiding people on their accounts for Shield defense and the like. So as it stands right now, I do think that this is the most updated feeling and impressions and research that I've done when it comes to Seth. And long story short, the quote that I said at the very beginning of the video, Seth is the best support that we've ever seen, is definitely not true. He is very impactful and very strong as it stands right now. However, even trying to validate or come up with angles to validate the statement, the only thing that I could argue for in terms of Seth being one of the best supports in the game is if you pair him with Jane exclusively and close your eyes. That's not really the mark of a great support though. That's the mark of Jane being super OP. Anyways though guys, that's going to be it for this video. Thank you again for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to check out the rest of my socials. I really appreciate it. As always, feel free to leave feedback in the comment section below. Please don't crucify me. This was just more updates and more footage that I've done on stream and more things that I found testing the characters in ZenlessZoneZero. So I hope you enjoyed or learned something from today's video. I'll see you guys all in the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.